My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and what I'm about to share with you will shatter everything you believe about family bonds. Just 5 days ago, my son Derek and his wife, Amanda, pushed my husband Thomas and me off an 80-foot cliff. As I lay there with my bones shattered and choking on my own blood, I heard Thomas whisper desperately, "Margaret, stay still. Play dead." But the real horror wasn't the fall. It was when Thomas revealed a truth so devastating that no mother should ever have to hear it. A secret our children had buried for 23 years. For 3.5 decades, Thomas and I thought we had built the perfect life together. We'd wake up in our modest 2-story home where the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with morning birdsong filtering through the kitchen windows. I spent my days as a librarian at the county library, coming home each evening with stories about patrons and their reading habits. Thomas ran a small contracting business, his skilled hands transforming blueprints into beautiful renovations. His calloused palms could turn the most outdated house into someone's dream home. We raised 2 boys, Nathan, our eldest, and Derek, born 6 years later. Nathan was the light of our household, always smiling, always eager to help his dad on job sites, always making sure I never worried about anything. Derek was quieter, more withdrawn, but I loved him just as fiercely. A mother doesn't choose favorites, or at least that's what I told myself every single day. Sunday afternoons were sacred in our home. After church services, our family would gather around the mahogany dining table Thomas had refinished himself. Nathan would share his ambitious plans for law school, while Derek sat silently, pushing food around his plate with a fork that seemed too heavy in his hands. Our life was uncomplicated, but full. In the evenings, Thomas and I would take walks through the neighborhood trails, talking about our dreams, how we'd watch our grandchildren grow, and how we'd spend our golden years in that very house. I never imagined those peaceful walks were preparing me for the one that would nearly end my life. On weekends, I'd organize family barbecues where my brothers, Marcus and David, would arrive with their wives and children. The backyard would explode with children's laughter, kids running everywhere through the sprinklers, women exchanging recipes by the grill while the men argued good-naturedly about sports and politics while fixing the fence or tinkering with the shed. Thomas was my ideal partner. After 35 years of marriage, he still picked wildflowers from construction sites to bring home to me. He'd help me organize library book donations, spending entire Saturdays sorting through boxes and labeling categories. I would hold measuring tapes for him while he cut lumber in his workshop, the smell of sawdust filling the air like a familiar perfume. We were partners, an inseparable unit, finishing each other's sentences and knowing what the other needed before words were spoken, or so I desperately believed. At night, we'd sit on our back deck, watching fireflies dance in the darkness, planning our future with the innocence of people who believed the worst was behind them. We talked about traveling cross-country in an RV once we retired, visiting the Grand Canyon for the first time, maybe even driving all the way to the Pacific Ocean. We dreamed about building a smaller cottage once the boys established their own families, something easier to maintain with a garden where I could grow tomatoes and herbs. But perfect happiness, I would learn years later, often masked the deepest tragedies waiting to surface. When Nathan turned 22, something shifted in our family dynamic that I couldn't quite put my finger on. He started having heated arguments with Derek about things I couldn't quite grasp, conversations that would stop abruptly when I entered a room. I'd catch them whispering tensely in hallways late at night, and they'd fall silent the instant I appeared, their faces turning toward me with expressions that seemed almost guilty. Thomas assured me it was normal sibling rivalry that would fade with time, that brothers always fought about something or other. I desperately wanted to believe him because I needed our family to remain intact, needed to believe that the foundation we'd built was solid. One evening in September, exactly 23 years ago, Nathan didn't come home for our usual family dinner. We always ate together at 6 o'clock sharp. It was one of our family traditions that I'd insisted on maintaining even as the boys grew older. We waited until midnight, then 1 a.m., then 2 a.m., each hour stretching longer than the last. Derek was supposedly in his bedroom studying for exams, preparing for his semester finals at the community college. But something in his demeanor made my skin crawl whenever I asked about his brother. There was a flatness to his responses, an absence of concern that didn't match the situation. Thomas went out to search for Nathan with several neighbors, men who'd known our family for years. They checked every corner of town, every trail Nathan was known to frequent, every location he might have wandered to, his favorite coffee shop where he studied, the community basketball courts where he played pickup games, the walking trails along the river where he liked to clear his head. At sunrise, just as the sky was turning from black to deep purple, they discovered his body at the bottom of Miller's Quarry, a local swimming hole that teenagers had used for decades despite the danger. The authorities ruled it an accidental death, suggesting he'd lost his footing in the darkness while walking too close to the edge. The medical examiner said Nathan's injuries were consistent with a fall from that height, that there were no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. I never questioned that conclusion because I couldn't fathom that the truth was far more sinister, more evil than my mind could have comprehended at that moment. How could I have imagined that one of my own sons had murdered the other? Nathan's funeral remains the darkest day of my existence, a day that's burned into my memory with painful clarity. I wore my only black dress, the same one from my father's memorial service years before. The church was packed with people, Nathan's friends from school, neighbors, colleagues from the law office where he'd been interning. Derek displayed an unsettling calmness for someone who'd just lost his older brother. While I sobbed uncontrollably, my body shaking with grief so profound I could barely stand, he remained stoic with an expression that now, knowing what I know, sends ice through my veins. Thomas never left my side that entire day, supporting me physically when my legs buckled beneath me, whispering comforting words that I now realize tasted like poison in his mouth. He held my hand during the service, his grip almost painfully tight, as if he were trying to transfer strength to me through sheer force of will. But now, I understand he was holding on for himself, carrying the unbearable weight of knowing the truth while watching me grieve in ignorance. After Nathan's death, Derek transformed completely, like a caterpillar emerging as something entirely different. He became remarkably attentive and caring, as though compensating for something unspeakable. He helped with household chores without being asked, washed dishes after dinner, vacuumed the living room, took out the trash. He accompanied his father to construction sites on weekends, learning the trade with sudden enthusiasm. He brought me tea when he saw me crying, sat with me in silence when I couldn't bear to talk, even organized photo albums of Nathan so we could remember the good times. I interpreted this as his way of processing grief, of filling the void Nathan left behind, of trying to be the son we needed now that we'd lost one. How foolishly naive I was. What he was actually doing was constructing an elaborate mask to conceal the monster lurking underneath, building a facade so convincing that even his own mother couldn't see through it. Years passed, and the wound never truly closed, but we adapted to living with the pain the way you adapt to a chronic illness. Derek married Amanda, a charming woman from across town who seemed sweet and genuine. She worked as a dental hygienist and always had a bright smile and a kind word for everyone. They appeared genuinely happy together, the kind of couple you'd see in a commercial for home insurance or retirement planning. They gave us 2 precious grandchildren, Emma and Jacob, and I finally felt like life was offering us a second chance at joy, a reason to smile again after years of grief. Amanda called me Mom from the very beginning and assisted with housework when they visited, never sitting idle while I cooked or cleaned. She'd help me fold laundry, chop vegetables, set the table. Derek had inherited Thomas's renovation skills and operated his own contracting company, taking on jobs throughout the county. Everything seemed perfect once more, like we'd weathered the worst storm and found calm waters on the other side. But now, lying broken at the bottom of this ravine with cracked ribs and the metallic taste of blood flooding my mouth, I understand that all that happiness was an intricately woven lie, a performance so masterful it had fooled everyone, including the people who knew him best. The warning signs started appearing 8 months ago when Thomas and I decided to update our estate planning. We'd been saving diligently our entire lives, living modestly and investing wisely. Between our house, which had appreciated significantly over the decades, the property I'd inherited from my grandparents, and our retirement accounts and savings, we had approximately $180,000 to leave behind for our children and grandchildren. It wasn't a fortune, but it was the result of a lifetime of careful financial management and sacrifice. It was Derek who first suggested we meet with an attorney to get our affairs in order. "Mom, Dad, you're both approaching 60 now," he told us one Sunday afternoon, his tone reasonable and caring. "It's crucial to have everything properly documented. You don't want to leave a mess for us to sort out if something happens." His smile seemed warm, but now it appears predatory, like a wolf showing its teeth before an attack. Amanda nodded beside him, gently squeezing my hand with fingers that would later shove me toward death. "We care about you so deeply, and we want to ensure you're completely protected," she added in her tender voice, her eyes wide with apparent sincerity. "Estate planning can be so complicated, but we'll help you through every step." How blind I was to interpret those words as genuine affection rather than the calculation they truly represented. The attorney, an elderly gentleman named Bernard Hutchins, whom we'd known for decades, outlined our options in his wood-paneled office that smelled of old books and furniture polish. We could establish a living trust to avoid probate, divide assets among Derek's children directly through education accounts and custodial arrangements, or create a standard will with clear beneficiaries. Each option had advantages and disadvantages, tax implications, and legal protections. Derek insisted on being named as our sole beneficiary and executor, arguing that he would distribute everything fairly to the grandchildren when the time came. "Besides," he reasoned, leaning forward in his chair with an earnest expression, "you're going to need our help as you get older. It makes more sense for us to have access to resources so we can care for you properly. You don't want to burden Emma and Jacob with adult responsibilities when they're still so young." Something about his insistence made me uncomfortable, a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't quite articulate. But Thomas seemed persuaded by the logic. My husband, who'd always been more trusting than me, more willing to see the best in people, accepted the proposal without much hesitation. I harbored doubts, especially remembering how Nathan had always talked about supporting us financially in our retirement years. My oldest son had dreams and plans, ambitions of becoming a successful lawyer who could take care of his aging parents. He'd talked about it often, saying things like, "When I'm making partner at the firm, I'm going to buy you guys a place near the beach," or "Don't worry about retirement, I'll make sure you're comfortable." But Nathan was gone, buried in the town cemetery under a marble headstone that read, "Beloved son and brother," and Derek was our only surviving child. What choice did we really have? We signed the documents on a Thursday afternoon in late October. I remember Amanda wore a lovely blue dress with white buttons and gave me a big, warm embrace after the ceremony. her perfume overwhelming and cloying. "Now we're officially bonded as a family forever," she whispered in my ear, her breath warm against my skin. Her words sent a chill down my spine even then, though I didn't understand why. There was something in her tone, something possessive and final that felt wrong. Derek shook Thomas's hand with a smile that never touched his eyes, and I noticed for just a moment how cold his gaze seemed, how calculating. That evening, while preparing dinner, chopping vegetables for a stew I'd made 100 times before, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a catastrophic mistake, that I'd signed away something more valuable than money. The weeks that followed felt increasingly strange, like living in a familiar house where all the furniture has been moved 2 inches to the left. Not obviously wrong, but subtly off in ways that kept you off balance. Derek and Amanda started visiting much more frequently, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week instead of their usual Sunday dinners. But their visits had an entirely different quality now. They no longer came simply to spend time together, to play with the kids in the backyard or share a meal. They constantly made suggestions about how we should renovate the house, which investments we should pursue, what insurance policies we should purchase. "Mom, you should seriously consider selling this large house and downsizing to something more manageable," Amanda said one Wednesday afternoon while examining our furniture with calculating eyes, running her fingers along the back of our sofa as if appraising its value. "We could help you find a comfortable condo downtown, something modern with an elevator so you don't have to worry about stairs. These older homes require so much maintenance." But I cherished our house with every fiber of my being. Every corner contained a precious memory. Every room told stories of our 35 years of marriage and the family we'd raised. The library, where I had cataloged thousands of books from estate sales and used bookstores, organizing them by genre and author with handwritten labels. The workshop, where Thomas created his renovation plans, walls covered with sketches and measurements, tools hanging in perfect order. The backyard, where our children and grandchildren had played for hours, where we'd hung a tire swing from the old oak tree and built a sandbox that was now overgrown with grass. I couldn't imagine living anywhere else, couldn't picture waking up in some sterile condo without the creaking floorboard in the hallway, or the way the morning sun hit the kitchen window just right. This house was more than wooden nails. It was the physical embodiment of our life together. When I expressed this to them, trying to explain why I couldn't bear to leave, I caught a flash of irritation in Derek's expression that froze my blood. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed just slightly, and for a split second I saw something dark and ugly beneath the surface. "Mom, you're being completely unreasonable," he said in a tone he'd never used with me before, sharp and dismissive. "This house is far too big for 2 people your age. If you fall down those stairs or something happens, we won't be able to reach you in time. Do you want to end up injured and alone, lying on the floor for hours before anyone finds you?" Amanda nodded vigorously, adding with fake concern, "Plus the maintenance costs must be astronomical. Property taxes, utilities, repairs, it's eating into your savings every month. It would be much smarter to sell now while the real estate market is strong and move to something more appropriate for seniors. You could probably get $350,000 for this place, maybe more." Thomas began considering their argument seriously, which surprised and disturbed me. My husband, who'd always been pragmatic and careful with money, started discussing the logic behind their suggestions, adding up numbers on a notepad, calculating potential returns on investment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something darker lurked beneath all this pressure, something predatory and dangerous. One night, after another tense conversation where Derek had brought charts and graphs showing housing market trends, I asked Thomas whether he didn't find it odd that Derek was suddenly so obsessed with our financial affairs. "Margaret, he's just concerned about our well-being," he replied while getting ready for bed, his words sounding rehearsed, like he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Maybe we should take his advice seriously. We're not getting any younger. Last month you complained about your knee hurting on the stairs. But I detected something in my husband's eyes, a shadow of doubt he refused to acknowledge, a flicker of suspicion he was pushing down. Now I know that Thomas already had his own suspicions, that he'd begun connecting dots I didn't even know existed, seeing patterns that terrified him. Too much to share. Things escalated dramatically when Derek suggested we grant him power of attorney over our finances during a meeting he'd scheduled with all the formality of a business appointment. "It's purely precautionary," he explained, while Amanda prepared coffee in our kitchen as if she owned the place, moving confidently through our cabinets and drawers. "If either of you becomes ill or faces a medical emergency, we can manage your affairs without complicated legal procedures. It just makes everything smoother, more efficient. You know how bureaucracy can be." The way he presented it, so casually, so logically, with Amanda nodding along supportively, almost convinced me. But something about his persistence made my stomach turn, made my hands shake as I held the papers he'd brought for us to review. I couldn't sleep that night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Thomas breathe beside me, trying to understand why I felt so deeply uneasy, why every instinct screamed that something was wrong. The next morning, I decided to call my brother Marcus for advice. Marcus had always been shrewder than me, more skeptical of people's true motivations. He worked as an accountant and understood money matters in ways I never had. When I explained Derek's increasing pressure, describing the frequency of his visits and the nature of his suggestions, Marcus remained silent for a long moment that stretched uncomfortably. "Margaret," he finally said, his voice careful and measured, "doesn't it strike you as bizarre that Derek is so desperate to control your money? I mean, he has his own successful business, right? He's doing well financially from what you've told me. Why would he need such extensive control over your finances? What's he planning to do that requires this level of access?" His words hit me like a physical blow, like someone had punched me in the stomach. He was absolutely right. Derek had never appeared to have financial struggles, never borrowed money from us, never shown any signs of needing our financial assistance. In fact, he'd always seemed prosperous, driving a nice truck, taking his family on vacations, living in a beautiful house across town. That afternoon, when Derek arrived for yet another discussion about our future, I decided to confront him directly, to voice the concerns that had been building inside me. "Son," I said as we sat in the living room, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from trembling, "why is it so critical for you to control our financial affairs? Your father and I are still perfectly capable of managing our own money. We've been doing it successfully for 35 years. His reaction was immediate and revealing, confirming every suspicion I'd been harboring. His face hardened instantly, the mask slipping for just a moment. His eyes went cold and distant, and for a split second I saw something in his expression that reminded me of someone else. Something calculating, predatory, and terrifying. That made me wonder if I really knew my own son at all. "Mom, it's not about control," he responded in a strained voice, each word carefully measured. "It's about love, protection, and family responsibility. I'm trying to help you, to make sure you're taken care of. Why are you making this so difficult? Don't you trust your own son?" But the way he emphasized family responsibility sounded more like a threat than an expression of care, more like a warning about consequences if I continued to resist. Amanda, who'd been silent until that moment, observing the interaction with unreadable eyes, intervened with her sweet yet firm voice. "Margaret, we simply want what's best for you," she said, reaching across to pat my hand with fingers that felt cold despite the warm room. "It's painful watching you stress about things we could easily handle for you. You've worked so hard all your life. Don't you think you deserve to relax and let someone else worry about the details? That night, after they left with tension hanging in the air like smoke, Thomas and I had our first serious argument in years, raising our voices in ways we hadn't since the boys were teenagers. He thought I was being paranoid, that I was manufacturing problems where none existed, seeing conspiracies in simple family concern. I insisted something was fundamentally wrong, that our son's behavior had changed too drastically, too suddenly. Thomas, I said as we cleaned the kitchen, my hands shaking as I washed dishes, do you remember what Derek was like before Nathan died? He was different, more distant, more, I can't explain it, but there was something about him that frightened me even then. Something in his eyes when he looked at his brother. My husband stopped washing the dish in his hands and looked at me intently, water dripping onto the counter. In his eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before: recognition, acknowledgement, and terrible guilt. Margaret, he said in an extremely low voice, barely above a whisper, there are things about Nathan's death that I never told you, things I've kept secret for 23 years. My heart started pounding so violently, I thought it would explode from my chest, blood rushing in my ears. The dish I was holding slipped from my fingers and clattered into the sink. Thomas's words struck me like lightning, illuminating dark corners I'd never known existed. What things about Nathan's death? I asked, with a trembling voice, my hands gripping the counter edge for support. My husband collapsed heavily into one of the kitchen chairs, the same table where we'd shared countless family meals, where Nathan used to do his homework with textbooks spread across the surface, where Derek had always sat in brooding silence, picking at his food. Thomas rubbed his face with both hands as if trying to erase memories that had haunted him for over 2 decades, aged him in ways I'd never understood. The night Nathan died, he began, in a broken voice that cracked with emotion. Derek wasn't in his bedroom studying like he claimed. I saw him leave the house around 7:30 p.m., moving quietly through the back door like he didn't want to be seen. I followed him because something about his behavior worried me. He'd been acting increasingly strange those previous days, more aggressive toward his brother, more resentful, making comments under his breath that didn't sit right. My husband paused, staring at his hands as if the terrible truth he'd concealed for over 2 decades was written across his palms in invisible ink that only he could read. I saw them arguing at Miller's quarry, Margaret. I heard them shouting horrible accusations at each other, their voices echoing off the rocks. I was too far away to reach them in time, hidden in the trees, watching something I should have prevented. My world began spinning out of control, the kitchen tilting sideways, as if the house itself was falling. What were they arguing about? I whispered, though part of me no longer wanted to know the answer, wanted to remain in ignorance where at least I still had the comfort of not knowing. Thomas looked up, and I saw tears forming in his eyes, tears he hadn't even shed at our oldest son's funeral, tears he'd been holding back for 23 years. About inheritance, Margaret. About money and family, and who deserved what. His voice broke completely. Derek was enraged because Nathan was the eldest, because according to traditional family practices, he would inherit the majority of our assets. But there was something more, something about money that Nathan had discovered, evidence he'd been gathering. What money? I asked, feeling the floor vanishing beneath my feet, the foundation of everything I believed crumbling away. Thomas sighed deeply before continuing, his shoulders sagging under the weight of confession. 3 days before he died, Nathan came to talk to me in my workshop. He was upset, agitated in a way I'd never seen before. He'd discovered that Derek had been stealing from our joint savings account, the one we'd set up for major house repairs and emergencies. Small amounts initially, $200 here, $500 there, but then increasingly larger sums. Nathan had documentation. He'd been investigating for months, printing bank statements, highlighting discrepancies, building a case. My mind refused to process what I was hearing, rejecting the information like a body rejecting a transplanted organ. My youngest son, the one who'd been so attentive after Nathan's death, who helped and cared for us, who seemed genuinely devoted to family. He'd been stealing from us even before his brother died. "Why did you never tell me?" I accused Thomas, feeling the betrayal multiply exponentially, spreading like poison through my veins. "Why did you let me believe Nathan's death was an accident for 23 years? "Because when I reached the quarry that night, it was already too late," he replied, in a choked voice, tears now streaming down his face. I saw Derek standing over Nathan's body at the bottom of the rocks. Our youngest son was shaking, crying, repeating over and over like a broken record, "It was an accident. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He tried to hit me first." He looked at me with those desperate eyes that looked so young and terrified, and begged me to help him. Thomas's voice broke completely, and he buried his face in his hands. "Dad," he said, "Nathan tried to attack me when I wouldn't admit to taking the money. He swung at me and lost his balance. I tried to grab him, but it was too late. Please, Dad, please don't let them take me away. I can't go to prison. It was an accident." And God help me, Margaret. I believed him in that moment. Or maybe I just wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too horrible to accept. Tears streamed uncontrollably down my cheeks, hot and bitter. "But you believed him," I murmured, though I already knew the answer, could see it written in every line of guilt etched into my husband's face. Thomas nodded slowly, with an expression of guilt that had consumed him for decades, eaten away at him from the inside. He was my son, Margaret. My youngest son was begging for my help, and Nathan was already dead. There was nothing I could do to bring one back to life, and turning Derek in would have destroyed what was left of our family. I thought it really was an accident, that Derek had learned his lesson, that he would become a better man after this tragedy. I thought the guilt would reform him, make him appreciate what he had. "And the stolen money?" I asked, needing to know every detail of this nightmare, needing to understand the full scope of the betrayal. Derek promised me he'd repay it gradually, claimed he'd taken the money to invest in a business venture that failed, some opportunity that seemed like a sure thing. He swore on everything holy that he'd never do something like that again, that Nathan's death had taught him the value of family. And I believed him, Margaret. God forgive me, but I believed him, because I needed to believe my son wasn't a murderer, wasn't a thief, wasn't the monster he's proven himself to be. I stood up from the table, stumbling, gripping the wall to keep from collapsing as the room spun around me. Everything I'd believed about my family, about my surviving son, about the last 23 years of my life, all of it was built on lies and secrets and covered up crimes. "Did he ever repay the money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Thomas's expression, from the way he couldn't meet my eyes. "Never," he replied, his voice barely audible. In fact, he continued stealing small amounts that I pretended not to notice because confronting him would mean admitting I'd covered up a murder. I became his accomplice, Margaret. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to see our accounts dwindling, every time I made excuses for missing money, I became more complicit in his crimes. I've been living with this guilt every single day for 23 years, watching you grieve for Nathan while knowing the truth, hating myself but not knowing how to fix it without destroying everything. The horrifying reality began crystallizing in my mind, like ice forming on a winter window, clear and sharp and painful. "That's why he's so obsessed with controlling our finances now," I murmured, pieces clicking into place. "It's not because he cares about us. It's because he wants to finish what he started 23 years ago. He wants access to everything we have, and he doesn't want us around to stop him." Thomas nodded gravely, reaching into his desk drawer. And there's something else, Margaret, something I just discovered a few weeks ago that changes everything. What else could there possibly be? I asked, feeling like my heart couldn't withstand any more revelations, couldn't take another blow without shattering completely. Thomas pulled out some papers he'd been hiding beneath other documents, folded and worn from repeated handling. I've been discreetly investigating Derek's finances, looking into his business records and tax filings. I still have contacts in the industry who owe me favors. His contracting business isn't doing nearly as well as he wants us to believe. In fact, he's facing bankruptcy. He owes over $120,000 to multiple banks and suppliers, with liens against his equipment and threats of foreclosure on his house. The papers trembled in my hands as I read the devastating numbers, saw the red ink and overdue notices, the letters from collection agencies. Derek wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. He was a desperate failure who'd been living on lies and stolen money for decades, maintaining an illusion of prosperity while drowning in debt. Does Amanda know all this? I asked, remembering her sweet smiles and loving embraces, her enthusiasm about helping us with our finances. I'm certain she does, Thomas replied, his voice hard. I've noticed how she steers conversations when they discuss our finances, how she asks very specific questions about our savings, the house's value, our life insurance policies. Those aren't innocent questions, Margaret. They're questions from someone calculating exactly how much our deaths are worth, someone who's been planning and scheming. That sentence sent ice through my veins, made my hands go numb. Our deaths, I repeated in a whisper, the words feeling unreal in my mouth. It was the first time I'd seriously considered that Derek might want to physically harm us, might see murder as a solution to his problems. Until that moment, I'd only thought he wanted to steal or defraud us financially, to manipulate us into giving him control. But if he'd killed his own brother for money, what would stop him from killing his parents for the same reason? If he'd done it once and gotten away with it, why wouldn't he do it again? Thomas, I said, gripping his hands desperately, my fingers digging into his skin, we have to go to the police. We have to tell them the truth about Nathan and about what's happening now. We can't just wait for him to... But my husband shook his head with an expression of hopelessness that broke my heart into smaller pieces. With what evidence, Margaret? I'm an accomplice to concealing a murder. If I speak now, I'll go to prison too. They'll charge me as an accessory after the fact. And besides, who's going to believe an old man of 63 who's been keeping this secret for 23 years? Derek will say I'm senile, that I'm making up stories to explain my own financial mismanagement. Amanda will back him up. It'll be our word against theirs, and we're the ones who look suspicious for waiting so long. He was right, and the truth of that settled over me like a heavy blanket. So we just wait for him to kill us like he killed Nathan? I asked desperately, my voice rising. We just sit here and let him choose the time and place? We're going to be extremely careful, Thomas said, trying to sound more confident than he actually felt, forcing determination into his voice. We're going to find a way to protect ourselves, to gather evidence, to catch him in the act. If he tries something, we'll be ready. But his words were interrupted by the ringing phone, its shrill tone cutting through the tension like a knife. We both stared at it for a moment before Thomas picked it up, his hand shaking slightly. It was Derek. "Hi, Mom," he said with that sweet voice that now sounded sinister to my ears, poisonous and false. I'd picked up the extension in the kitchen, listening to every word. "Amanda and I were thinking, and we believe it would be wonderful to celebrate your 35th wedding anniversary with something special. How about we take you to those mountain trails you've always talked about this weekend? We could go on a family hike, take photographs, have a perfect day together as a family, make some memories." My blood turned to ice, freezing in my veins. I looked at Thomas across the kitchen, and he had the same expression of terror, his face draining of color. "That's such a thoughtful idea, son. I managed to reply in a shaking voice, forcing the words out. "But let us think about it, and we'll call you back tomorrow." "Don't think too long," Derek said, and I could hear the edge in his voice, the impatience. "The weather forecast looks perfect for this weekend. Next week it's supposed to rain." After hanging up, Thomas and I stared at each other in silence for what felt like hours, knowing we'd just received an invitation to our own execution, a carefully planned murder disguised as a family celebration. "The mountains," I murmured, my voice barely audible. "He's going to take us to the mountains to kill us and make it look like an accident, just like Nathan." Thomas nodded gravely, his jaw clenched. "Just like he did with Nathan at the quarry. Isolated location, a tragic fall, grieving family members left behind to inherit everything." That night, we didn't sleep for even a minute, holding each other in our bed, our hearts racing, desperately planning how we could possibly save ourselves from our own son. We whispered plans and possibilities, considered options, and dismissed them, trying to find some way out of the trap that was closing around us. The next few days became a nightmare of terror and pretense, living in constant fear while having to maintain normal appearances. Thomas and I had to act as though nothing had changed when Derek and Amanda visited, smiling when they excitedly discussed the mountain trip, nodding when they talked about quality family time and making memories, but inside, every fiber of my being screamed with fear. Every moment felt like waiting for an executioner's axe to fall. I knew I was looking into the eyes of my oldest son's murderers, and that they were now planning to do the same to me and my husband. Amanda arrived on Tuesday afternoon with a shopping bag and that radiant smile that now seemed demonic, her cheerfulness grotesque and obscene. "Margaret, dear," she said, embracing me with arms that would soon push me toward death, her perfume overwhelming and nauseating. I bought supplies for our mountain adventure: trail mix, energy bars, water bottles, fresh fruit, everything we'll need for the picnic. I even got those granola bars you like. She showed me the bag's contents as if she were an excited child planning a birthday party, but I could only think about how each item could be used to cover up our murder. The water bottles to explain why we were dehydrated if we tried to escape, the food to show we'd planned to be gone all day. Every detail calculated to support their story. "I also brought my new camera," she added, pulling out an expensive digital camera with professional lenses. "I want to capture every moment of this special day. These will be photos we'll treasure forever, something to look back on." The irony of her words made me nauseous, made my stomach heave. The only photos she'd take would be of our broken bodies at the bottom of some cliff, if anyone ever found us, if they didn't hide our corpses completely. Derek appeared behind her carrying a brand new hiking backpack, the price tag still attached. "Dad," he said to Thomas, with feigned enthusiasm that made my skin crawl, "I purchased all the necessary safety equipment: climbing ropes, carabiners, emergency flares, flashlights, a comprehensive first aid kit. We'll be completely prepared for anything." Every word from his mouth sounded like cruel mockery, like a sadist describing the tools he'll use for torture. Safety equipment to plan our murders. The perversity of the situation made me dizzy, made the room spin. "Isn't this a bit dangerous for people our age?" I asked, trying to sound casual while searching desperately for any excuse to cancel the trip. Thomas's knee has been bothering him lately, and my blood pressure medication makes me dizzy sometimes. Amanda stroked my cheek with false tenderness that made my stomach churn, her fingers cold against my skin. "That's exactly why we chose a very easy and safe trail," she assured me, her voice dripping with fake concern. "It's a hike. Even children can manage very gentle slopes. Plus, Derek and I will be there to take care of you every step of the way. We'll go at whatever pace you need." Yes, They'd take care of us right up until the precise moment they decided to push us off a cliff, watching us fall to our deaths with those same sweet smiles. That night, after they finally left with promises to pick us up early Saturday morning, Thomas and I sat in our living room trembling, not from cold, but from absolute terror we'd been suppressing for hours. The house felt like a prison, the walls closing in. "We can't go," I said, gripping his hand so tightly my knuckles turned white. "We simply cannot. We'll tell them we're sick, that we changed our minds, anything." "If we don't go," Thomas replied in a grave voice, staring at nothing, "they'll find another way to kill us. Maybe something that looks even more accidental, like a house fire while we sleep, or a carbon monoxide leak, or a robbery gone wrong. At least in the mountains, we know what they're planning to attempt. We can prepare." His words had terrible logic, but they offered no comfort whatsoever, no reassurance. "So what do you suggest?" I asked, desperate for any solution that would save our lives. "We just walk into our own murders?" Thomas thought silently for several minutes before answering, his brow furrowed in concentration. "We're going to go, but we'll be prepared. I'm going to hide my cell phone and set it to record everything that happens, every word, every action. If we manage to survive, we'll have evidence that can't be disputed. And if we don't—" His voice broke, tears welling in his eyes. "At least someone will know the truth. Your brother Marcus will find the letter I'm going to leave him, and he'll find the phone." On Friday night, we could barely touch our dinner, the food tasteless and impossible to swallow. We knew it might be our last meal together in our house, in that kitchen where we'd shared so many happy moments, when we were still a real family, when we still believed in love and trust. "I wrote a letter," Thomas confessed after we'd given up pretending to eat, pulling a sealed envelope from his desk drawer. "It's addressed to your brother Marcus. In it, I explain everything we know about Nathan's death and what we believe Derek plans to do to us. I've hidden it in the safe with our important documents, along with copies of Derek's financial records and the investigation I've been doing. If we don't return from this trip, at least he'll know where to look for the truth." That night, we went to bed holding each other, whispering words of love that could be our last, trying to memorize every detail of this final night together. "If something happens to me," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to know that these 35 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the mistakes and the secrets and the lies, I love you more than my own life. You've been my everything." I cried silently, memorizing the rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body pressed against mine, the familiar scent of his skin, the way his hand felt in mine. These small details suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. Saturday morning dawned with clear skies that seemed to mock our situation, the sun shining cheerfully, as if the universe itself was oblivious to our terror. Derek arrived early, whistling a cheerful tune that chilled my blood to ice, his good mood obscene given what we knew he was planning. "Morning, early birds," he called from the front door, his voice bright and false. "Ready for your big adventure? It's a perfect day for hiking." Amanda appeared behind him, radiant as a bride on her wedding day. Except this was a marriage with death, a ceremony of murder. She carried a picnic basket and wore expensive hiking clothes that looked brand new. During breakfast, which we could barely force down past the lumps in our throats, Derek explained the route in meticulous detail, spreading maps across our kitchen table. "It's a stunning trail," he said, tracing the path with his finger. "It leads to an overlook called Eagles Point, where you can see the entire valley. They say the views are absolutely spectacular, some of the best in the state. People come from all over to see it." His eyes gleamed with enthusiasm that seemed demonic, unholy. Of course the views would be spectacular. they'd be the last we'd ever see, the final image burned into our dying eyes. "The trail has some steep sections," Amanda added, as if providing helpful tourist information, consulting notes on her phone. "But nothing that experienced hikers like you can't handle. We checked the reviews online, and everyone says it's manageable for all fitness levels." Her comment about our supposed hiking abilities sounded like a cruel joke, a mockery. We were two people approaching 60 who barely walked through the neighborhood park once a week, and suddenly we were experienced hikers. As we loaded the car, I watched Derek meticulously checking his backpack one final time, ensuring he had everything needed for his plan. I glimpsed ropes coiled neatly, a small folding shovel, work gloves, and something that looked like a flare gun nestled among the supplies. "What's that for?" I asked, pointing to the flare gun, my voice shakier than I intended. "Safety precautions," he replied, without missing a beat, his answer too smooth, too rehearsed. "If we get lost or something goes wrong, we can send a distress signal that can be seen for miles. It's standard hiking safety." Of course, they'd send a distress signal after pushing us off a cliff so our bodies could be found quickly, so it would be confirmed as a tragic hiking accident before evidence could degrade. Everything was calculated down to the smallest detail. Every single element had been planned to make our murders look perfectly natural, completely accidental. The drive to the mountains lasted 2 hours that felt like an eternity, each mile bringing us closer to our deaths. Amanda put on upbeat music and sang along cheerfully, her voice grating on my nerves. She sang songs about sunshine and happiness while planning murder. Derek drove carefully, obeying every speed limit, stopping at every stop sign, using his turn signals religiously. He didn't want to risk a traffic accident that would ruin his perfect plans, didn't want any police involvement before the murders. During the trip, Thomas discreetly took my hand and activated the voice recording on his phone, hidden in his jacket pocket, pressing the button without looking. Everything that happened from that moment forward would be recorded. Every word they spoke, every confession they made. If we managed to survive, we'd have proof that couldn't be denied. If not, at least the truth wouldn't die with us, wouldn't be buried along with our bodies. When we finally arrived at the trailhead, my heart was pounding so violently, I thought it would burst from my chest, explode from the sheer terror. The location was beautiful, towering pine trees reaching toward the sky, the sound of a nearby stream bubbling over rocks, birds singing in the branches. But for me, it had transformed into the setting for my own execution, a natural cathedral where my life would end. Derek and Amanda retrieved their backpacks from the car, smiling and joking with each other as if it were the happiest day of their lives, as if they weren't about to commit murder. They took selfies by the trail marker, Amanda posting them to social media with captions about family time and making memories. "Ready for the adventure?" Derek asked, adjusting his backpack straps and looking at us with those cold eyes. And for the first time in 23 years, I saw clearly the same cold gleam in his eyes that he'd had the night he killed his brother. The same emptiness where empathy should have been. The trail started out relatively easy, winding between lush trees and moss-covered boulders, wildflowers blooming in patches of sunlight. Amanda walked ahead of us, constantly taking photographs and commenting on the landscape's beauty with manufactured enthusiasm. "Look at those wildflowers," she exclaimed, pointing toward clusters of purple and yellow blooms growing beside the path. "And that gorgeous bird? I think it's a blue jay. Isn't nature just amazing?" Her performance was flawless, that of a loving daughter-in-law enjoying a special day with her in-laws, creating memories to cherish forever. If someone had been watching from a distance, they would have seen a happy family on a pleasant outing, nothing suspicious at all. Derek walked behind us, supposedly ensuring we didn't fall behind, playing the role of attentive son. but I could feel his eyes boring into our backs like daggers, could sense him watching and waiting for the perfect moment. Every time I turned to look at him, he smiled with that grin he'd perfected over 23 years of lies, that mask he wore so convincingly. "How are you holding up, Mom and Dad?" He'd ask with fake concern every few minutes. "Need to stop and rest? There's no rush. We have all day." After an hour of hiking, my legs already aching from the unfamiliar exertion, we began climbing a steeper section of the trail. The path narrowed, rocks becoming looser underfoot. My legs felt heavy, muscles burning, and Thomas was breathing with difficulty beside me, his face flushed with exertion. We weren't used to this kind of physical exercise, hadn't done anything like this in years, and our murderous children knew it perfectly. They'd chosen a route that would exhaust us physically, wearing us down, making us vulnerable for when the time came to execute their plan. "We're almost at the overlook," Amanda announced cheerfully from up ahead, though, according to the map I'd studied secretly at home, we still had at least another hour of hiking to reach Eagle's Point. Her lie confirmed what I already knew. They had no intention of reaching the real overlook. The place where they planned to kill us must be much closer, some spot they'd scouted beforehand. During the hike, I tried to memorize every detail, every distinctive tree with unusual markings, every rock formation that might serve as a landmark, every turn in the path. If somehow I survived this, I'd need to explain to police exactly where everything happened, would need to lead them back to this place. Thomas was doing the same beside me, and we occasionally exchanged glances loaded with terror and grim determination, silent communication between people who'd spent 35 years together. We knew we were walking toward our deaths, marching to our own funeral, but we also knew this was our only chance to obtain evidence against our murderers, to finally bring justice for Nathan after 23 years of lies. "Oh, look at that!" Amanda suddenly shouted, her voice cutting through my thoughts. She pointed to a rock formation looming to our right, jutting out from the hillside. "That cliff has an incredible view. Why don't we climb up there for some special photographs? It looks perfect." My blood ran cold, freezing in my veins. There it was, the place they'd chosen for our murder, the spot they'd selected so carefully. The cliff rose approximately 80 feet above the main trail, a sheer wall of rock accessible by a secondary path that looked far more treacherous than the one we'd been following. The rocks appeared loose and unstable, crumbling in places. There were fewer trees to grab if we stumbled, less vegetation to break a fall, and from the top, you could see a precipice that dropped into a deep ravine filled with jagged rocks below, a fall that no one could possibly survive. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, trying to sound casual despite the terror flooding through me. "That path looks quite dangerous for people our age. Maybe we should just take pictures here on the main trail." But Derek had already started walking toward the turnoff, his decision made, his plan in motion. He carried his backpack full of safety equipment that I knew he wouldn't use to save us, only to stage the scene afterward. "Come on, Mom," he said, with that voice he'd used as a child when trying to convince me of something. That manipulative tone I'd heard 1,000 times. "It'll only take a few minutes, and the photos will be amazing. This is a once-in-a-lifetime view. Don't you want to remember this day forever?" The way he emphasized "remember this day forever" made me tremble, made my knees weak. Yes, if we went up there, we'd remember it forever, right up until the moment we died. Thomas squeezed my hand discreetly, reminding me that his phone was recording everything, capturing every word and sound. We had to continue, had to see this through to the end. We had to go all the way to get the evidence we needed. If we refused now, if we turned back, they'd simply find another opportunity, another place, another excuse to kill us. Better to face it now, on our terms, with documentation of their intentions. The climb to the cliff was exhausting. each step more difficult than the last. Loose rocks slid beneath our feet, sending small avalanches of pebbles tumbling down behind us. More than once I nearly fell, my foot slipping on unstable ground, my heart leaping into my throat. But the most terrifying realization was how perfect this place was for murder, how ideally suited for making a death look accidental. If someone accidentally stumbled and fell from the top, there'd be no possibility of survival, no chance of rescue, and most importantly, there'd be no witnesses, no one to see what really happened. "Almost there," Amanda called from above, where she'd already arrived with the agility of someone who'd scouted this route carefully beforehand, who knew exactly where to step. Her athletic ability suddenly seemed suspicious. Had she been training for this? Derek followed her, then reached down to help Thomas and me complete the last several feet of the climb. His hands on my arms felt like vulture talons, predatory and cold. I had to resist the urge to jerk away from his touch, to scream at him that I knew what he was planning. The overlook was indeed spectacular, breathtakingly beautiful. From there, you could see the entire valley spreading out below, distant mountains purple in the haze, the river winding through the forest like a silver ribbon. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a beautiful moment to share with family, a memory to treasure. But knowing what I knew, the place seemed like the perfect setting for a nightmare. Nature's beauty twisted into something sinister. "Come over here for the photos," Amanda called, positioning herself strategically near the cliff's edge. "I want the valley as the background. Stand right here where the light is perfect." Thomas and I approached slowly, shuffling forward, each step bringing us closer to our final destination. I could see Derek moving behind us now, no longer pretending to be beside us. He was positioning himself strategically, calculating angles, measuring distances with his eyes. This was it. This was the moment they'd been planning. "Perfect positioning," Amanda exclaimed with false enthusiasm, raising her expensive camera. "Now, embrace each other and smile. Show me that love that's lasted 35 years. Thomas and I hugged, probably for the last time, our arms wrapping around each other desperately. While she took picture after picture, I memorized the feel of him against me, the way we fit together after all these years. Every camera flash seemed like lightning announcing the approaching storm, counting down the seconds until our deaths. "Take one more," Derek suggested, his voice closer now, right behind us. "But this time, step back just a little bit so the landscape shows better in the frame. Just 2 steps back." 2 steps back meant standing exactly at the precipice's edge, exactly where they wanted us. Thomas and I exchanged a knowing look, a lifetime of communication passing between us in a single glance. The moment had arrived. There was no more delaying, no more pretending. We moved backward as instructed, our heels at the very edge, feeling solid ground disappear beneath our feet with only the emptiness of the abyss remaining behind us. My heart hammered so hard I thought everyone could hear it. Amanda raised the camera one more time, but this time I saw something different in her eyes, saw the mask finally drop completely. There was no longer any need for pretense, no more acting required. The mask had fallen away, revealing the monster underneath. "Smile," she said, in a voice that was no longer sweet at all, no longer kind or loving. "This is going to be your last photograph. Say goodbye." At that instant, I felt Derek lunge toward us from behind, his body moving fast, his arms extending to push. The plan was brutally simple: shove us backward so we'd fall into the void, take some photos of the accident scene, then descend to discover our broken bodies and call for help as traumatized survivors. But Thomas had been preparing for this moment, had been ready. In the last possible second, with reflexes I didn't know he still possessed, he managed to grab Derek's wrist as our son's hands made contact with his back. Thomas pulled him forward with surprising strength, yanking with all the force desperation can provide. If we're going to die, you're coming with us," he shouted with a fury I'd never witnessed in him before, his voice raw and primal. "You murdered Nathan, and you'll pay for it." For a moment, all four of us teetered on the cliff's edge in a horrible dance, holding on to each other in a macabre embrace between life and death. Amanda screamed, a high-pitched sound of genuine fear, and lunged forward to help Derek, to pull him back from the edge. But the combined weight was too much, the momentum unstoppable, physics taking over. I felt the ground give way completely beneath my feet, felt gravity beginning to win the battle, pulling us down, and then all four of us fell together, locked in a deadly embrace, our screams mingling as the air whistled around us and the rocky ground approached at terrifying speed, rushing up to meet us. In those seconds that lasted an eternity, time seeming to slow down, I thought of Nathan, of how he must have felt when Derek pushed him into Miller's quarry 23 years ago, of his final moments of terror and betrayal. Did he have time to understand what was happening? Did he call out for help that never came? The impact was brutal, more violent than anything I could have imagined. I heard the sickening sound of bones shattering, a sound I'll never forget. Felt my own body breaking against the unforgiving rocks. The pain was indescribable, beyond anything I'd ever experienced, beyond what I thought the human body could endure. Even more terrible was the taste of blood flooding my mouth, choking me, and the certainty that this time Derek had won. This time there would be no witnesses to tell the truth, no justice for us or for Nathan. But then, through the haze of agony, I heard Thomas's voice, weak but clear, cutting through the fog of pain. "Margaret, don't move. Play dead. Don't make a sound." And I realized something incredible, something impossible. I was still alive. Against all odds, despite the fall, despite the impact, my heart was still beating. The pain was so intense, I thought I'd lose consciousness, thought my mind would shut down to escape the agony. Every fiber of my being screamed in torment. I felt blood running down my face, warm and sticky, pooling beneath me. Something wet soaked through my clothes. More blood, so much blood. But Thomas's voice echoed in my ears like a divine command, like an anchor keeping me conscious. Play dead. With willpower I didn't know I possessed, drawing on reserves of strength I didn't know existed, I remained completely motionless. I controlled even my breathing, making it imperceptible, shallow enough that someone checking would think I'd stopped breathing entirely. I kept my eyes half open but unfocused, staring at nothing, the way dead people's eyes look. A few feet away, maybe 10 or 15 feet from where I lay, I could hear moans of pain from Derek and Amanda. They'd also survived the fall, their voices confirming they were alive. But from their groans and the way they moved, dragging themselves across the ground, they seemed to be in worse condition than we were. Or perhaps Thomas and I were just better at hiding our injuries. "Amanda," I heard my son's broken voice, filled with pain and fear. "Are you okay? Can you move?" His concern for his wife, the genuine emotion in his voice, made my stomach turn, made me want to vomit. This man who'd murdered his own brother, who'd just tried to kill his parents, was still capable of feeling love for someone. How could someone contain such contradiction, love and murder existing side by side in the same heart? "I think I broke my leg," Amanda moaned, her voice high and thin with agony. "It hurts so much, Derek. Oh, God, it hurts. And my arm, I can't move my arm." "And what about the old people?" she asked after a moment, her voice strained. "Did they survive?" The disrespectful way she referred to us, the old people, as if we weren't even human, as if we were just obstacles that needed removing, confirmed what I already knew deep in my bones. We had never been family to her, never been loved ones deserving of care. We were just targets, just means to an end, just money waiting to be inherited. I heard movement, the sound of someone crawling across rocks and dirt, dragging themselves painfully. Derek was crawling toward us, and I had to fight every instinct to remain perfectly still, to not flinch or tense as he approached. My heart beat so frantically, I was terrified he'd hear it. Terrified it would give me away. "They're dead," he announced after several minutes that felt like hours, his voice matter-of-fact, clinical. "Both of them. Eyes are open, but they're not breathing. No pulse. They're gone." His lie filled me with a strange hope, a desperate relief. If he believed we were dead, if they thought their plan had succeeded, maybe we'd have a chance. Maybe they'd leave us here and go for help, giving us time to call for rescue ourselves. "Perfect," Amanda whispered with satisfaction that chilled my blood, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet ravine. "It worked exactly as we planned, just like we discussed." "Well, except for the part where we fell too," Derek replied with bitter humor. "That wasn't supposed to happen. Now we're stuck down here with broken bones." I heard Amanda's bitter laugh, a sound without joy. "At least we won't have to pretend we love them anymore." God, I'm so tired of playing the devoted daughter-in-law. Do you know how exhausting it's been? Calling her Mom, helping with dishes, pretending to care about her boring library stories? "Tell me about it," Derek agreed, and I could hear him shifting position, rocks scraping. 23 years of playing the good son. 23 years of listening to stories about perfect Nathan, how smart he was, how successful he would have been. Well, look who's successful now. We're about to inherit everything. Their casual conversation about our deaths, their complete lack of remorse, confirmed the depth of their evil. These weren't people who'd made a desperate mistake. They were calculating murderers who'd planned this for months, maybe years. For the next several minutes that felt like hours, they discussed their situation with the pragmatism of people solving a logistics problem. Both were injured but mobile enough to crawl. The plan now was to make their way down the ravine until they found a spot where Derek's phone had signal, then call for help. They'd tell the heartbreaking story of how they'd miraculously survived a tragic accident that killed their poor, beloved in-laws. "Remember the story," Derek instructed Amanda, his voice taking on a rehearsal quality. "We need to get this exactly right." We were taking pictures when a rock came loose under Dad's feet. He lost his balance and tried to grab something. Mom reached for him instinctively, trying to help. They both fell, and we tried to save them, but got pulled over too in the process. We're the traumatized survivors. We did everything we could, but it happened so fast. "I know," Amanda replied, her voice gaining strength as she practiced her role. "We've rehearsed this 100 times, Derek. I know my lines. We're the heartbroken family members who lost their dear parents in a horrible accident. Poor us, having to deal with this tragedy. Everyone will feel so sorry for us." Her performance was so convincing, so practiced, that if I hadn't lived the truth, if I hadn't felt their hands pushing me toward death, I would have believed every word. She would cry real tears, show genuine emotion, and no one would suspect. "We should probably start moving," Derek said after a pause. "The longer we wait, the more questions they'll ask about why we didn't call for help immediately." "What about their bodies?" Amanda asked. "Should we, I don't know, arrange them somehow? Make it look more realistic?" "No," Derek said quickly, firmly. "Don't touch them. Investigators will check for signs of tampering. Everything needs to look exactly like it was a natural fall. Our injuries prove we tried to save them. That's our story, and we're sticking to it." Gradually, their voices faded as they crawled away from us, dragging themselves across rocks and through brush, moving toward what they hoped would be their salvation. Each groan of pain, each scrape of movement grew quieter until finally, blessedly, silence fell over the ravine. When I was certain they were far enough away that they couldn't hear us, when their voices had completely disappeared, Thomas whispered my name so quietly I could barely hear it, his voice thread thin. "Margaret, are you okay?" "Can you hear me?" I answered in the same whisper, barely moving my lips, confirming I was alive. Relief flooded through me at the sound of his voice, at knowing he'd survived too. "My left leg is broken," he told me in a voice choked with pain, each word an effort. "I can feel the bone grinding, and I think I have several fractured ribs. Every breath hurts. What about you?" I did a careful mental inventory of my body, checking each part systematically. I felt stabbing pain in my right arm, definitely broken, the bone probably shattered. My head throbbed as if someone were hitting it with a hammer, a concussion for sure. There was definitely something wrong with my shoulder, maybe dislocated, maybe broken, but I was alive. My mind was working, and that was more than I'd hoped for. "We're in bad shape, but we're alive," I whispered back, stating the impossible truth. "Does your phone still work? Did it survive the fall?" I heard Thomas struggle to reach his jacket pocket, heard him groan with the effort. "It works," he said after a moment, and I could hear the hope in his voice. "The screen is cracked, but it's still recording. But Margaret, there's no signal down here. We're too deep in the ravine." That was the most terrifying part of our situation, the realization that crushed my brief hope. We were alive, but trapped at the bottom of a ravine, seriously injured, with no way to communicate with the outside world. If no one came looking for us soon, if Derek and Amanda's story was believed, we'd die here slowly from our injuries, from dehydration, from exposure to the elements. "Thomas," I whispered, my voice breaking, "before it's too late, before we lose consciousness, or worse, I need you to tell me everything that really happened the night Nathan died. I need to know the whole truth. No more secrets." My husband sighed deeply, the sound filled with 23 years of guilt and regret. "That night," he began in a trembling voice, forcing the words out, "Nathan came to find me in my workshop around 6:30. The sun was setting. I remember because the light was coming through the window at that angle it does in late September. He was furious, more angry than I'd ever seen him. His hands were shaking. He had papers clutched in his fists, bank statements highlighted and marked up with notes in his careful handwriting." The physical pain mingled with emotional anguish as I listened to the truth that had been hidden for decades, the secrets that had poisoned our family. Richard showed me evidence that Derek had been stealing money from our accounts for at least 8 months, probably longer, Thomas continued, his voice breaking. "Small amounts at first, $200 here, $350 there, then larger sums, $1,000, $2,500. Nathan had been investigating because he'd noticed discrepancies when he was helping you balance the checkbook one month. You remember? You asked him to look at the numbers because something seemed off." I did remember vaguely. Nathan sitting at our kitchen table with bank statements spread out, his brow furrowed in concentration, saying he'd look into it. I thought he'd found the error and fixed it. I never imagined what he'd actually discovered. Nathan wanted to confront Derek that same night. Thomas went on. He was adamant, determined. He said we couldn't wait another day, that Derek might steal more, might disappear with the money. I tried to calm him down, tried to convince him to wait until morning when everyone's heads were clearer, but he wouldn't listen. He was so angry, so betrayed. He kept saying, how could he steal from his own parents? How could he do this to Mom? My heart ached hearing about Nathan's anger on my behalf, his desire to protect me, his sense of family loyalty, all the things that had gotten him killed. I followed him because I was terrified of what might happen, Thomas admitted. I knew Nathan's temper when he was angry. He was passionate, intense. And I'd noticed something about Derek lately, something that scared me. A coldness in his eyes sometimes, an absence of normal emotion. The way he'd look at Nathan with this calculation, like he was solving a problem rather than looking at his brother. When I reached Miller's quarry, Thomas's voice dropped even lower. I found them screaming at each other. Nathan had the papers in his hand, waving them in Derek's face. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything from where I was hiding in the trees. "You're a thief!" Nathan was yelling. "You're stealing from our own parents, from Mom who works so hard, from Dad who trusts you." Derek denied everything at first, said Nathan was crazy, said he'd made mistakes in his calculations. I could picture the scene so clearly, my two sons facing off in the darkness by the water, one accusing, one denying, their voices echoing off the quarry walls. "What happened next?" I whispered, though I already knew, could feel the truth settling over me like a shroud. Thomas paused for a long time before continuing, gathering strength. Nathan told him that if he didn't return the money immediately and confess everything to us, he'd go to the police himself in the morning. He'd report it as theft, press charges if necessary. He said, "I won't let you destroy this family, won't let you hurt Mom and Dad any more than you already have." Derek went completely berserk, Thomas said, his voice shaking with the memory. I'd never seen him like that. He screamed that Nathan had always been the favorite, that he'd always had everything easy, the better grades, the more friends, our approval, everything. He yelled that it was time for things to change, that Nathan had gotten enough in life. And then Thomas's voice broke completely, dissolved into sobs. Derek pushed Nathan. It wasn't an accident, wasn't self-defense. He pushed him with both hands, deliberately, with all his force. I saw Nathan trying to keep his balance, saw his arms flailing desperately, searching for something to grab onto. His eyes were so wide, so terrified. I started running toward them, screaming, but I was too far away. Nathan fell backward over the edge, and I heard him hit the rocks below. That sound. Margaret, I still hear that sound in my nightmares every single night. Tears streamed uncontrollably down my cheeks, mixing with the blood from my wounds, leaving trails through the dirt on my face. "But you believed Derek when he said it was an accident," I said, not quite a question, more an acknowledgement of a terrible truth. "When I got to where Derek was standing," Thomas whispered, he was trembling, crying real tears, repeating over and over like a broken record, "It was an accident. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. He tried to hit me first. I just pushed him away." He looked at me with those desperate eyes that looked so young, so much like the little boy I'd raised, and begged me to help him. He said, "Dad, please." Nathan tried to attack me when I wouldn't admit to the money. He swung at me and lost his balance when I defended myself. "Please, Dad, please don't let them take me away. I can't go to prison. It was an accident." "And you believed him?" I repeated, understanding even as I hated it. Thomas nodded, though I couldn't see him in the dim light of the ravine. He was my son, Margaret. My youngest son was begging for my help on his knees in the dirt, and Nathan was already dead at the bottom of the quarry. There was nothing I could do to bring one back to life. I thought, God help me, I thought that turning Derek in would just destroy what was left of our family. I convinced myself it really was an accident, that Derek had been defending himself, that the guilt would reform him. I thought Nathan's death would teach him the value of family, make him appreciate what he had. "And the stolen money?" I asked, needing to know every detail, every lie. "Derek promised he'd repay every penny," Thomas said. He claimed he'd taken it to invest in some business opportunity that seemed guaranteed, something about real estate that had fallen through. He swore on everything holy that he'd never steal again, that he'd learned his lesson. He said Nathan's death had made him realize how precious family was. And I believed him, Margaret, because I desperately needed to believe my son wasn't a murderer, wasn't a thief, wasn't the monster he's proven himself to be. I lay there in silence, processing decades of lies, trying to reconcile the son I'd loved with the killer he'd always been. "Did he ever pay back any of the money?" I finally asked, though I knew the answer. "Never," Thomas replied, his voice hollow. "Not a single dollar. In fact, he kept stealing small amounts he thought we wouldn't notice. And I pretended not to see it because confronting him would mean admitting I'd covered up a murder. Every time I stayed silent, every time I pretended not to notice missing money, I became more of his accomplice. I've been living with this guilt every single day for 23 years, Margaret, watching you grieve for Nathan, knowing the truth, hating myself, but not knowing how to fix it without destroying everything. The horrifying reality of our situation settled over me. That's why he was so desperate to control our finances, I murmured, understanding finally clicking into place. He knew you knew the truth. He was afraid that eventually you'd tell me, that we'd go to the police. He needed us dead before we could expose him. And there's more, Thomas said, his voice grim. When I investigated his current finances, I found something worse. He doesn't just owe $120,000 to banks and suppliers. He owes $75,000 to a loan shark, someone with connections to organized crime, the kind of people who don't just sue you, they hurt you, hurt your family. Derek was facing a death sentence either way. Our inheritance was his only hope of survival. The pieces all fit together now, creating a picture of desperate evil. Derek hadn't just wanted our money. He'd needed it to save his own life. We were never his parents in his eyes, just obstacles between him and survival. Just then, we heard voices in the distance, growing louder. Derek and Amanda had managed to find help. Soon rescue teams would be here, and our murderous children would perform the roles of their lives. The voices grew closer, accompanied by the distinctive sound of a helicopter circling overhead, its rotors thumping rhythmically. The rescue team had arrived quickly, and with them came the most crucial moment of our lives. Thomas and I had only minutes to make a decision that would determine whether justice was served or whether our murderers walked free. Should we continue pretending to be dead until we found the perfect opportunity to reveal the truth? Or should we risk being rescued alongside Derek and Amanda, trusting that the recording on Thomas's phone would be enough evidence? "Margaret," Thomas whispered urgently, his voice barely audible over the approaching sounds. The phone recorded everything that happened up there on the cliff. We have Amanda's confession about the plan being exactly what they wanted. We have Derek's comment about not having to pretend anymore. We have everything. But if they realize we're alive now, if they know we heard their confessions, they might find a way to destroy the phone, to silence us permanently before anyone can hear the recording. He was absolutely right. If Derek and Amanda discovered we'd survived and overheard everything, they'd be desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. They might try to finish the job right here, might claim we attacked them in a confused state, might find a way to make the phone disappear. We had to wait for the perfect moment, had to be strategic. "We keep playing dead," I whispered back, making the decision, until we're separated from them, until we're with people who can protect us. "They're down here," Derek's voice suddenly shouted from somewhere above us, echoing off the ravine walls. "My parents, please hurry. They fell and we tried to save them, but we couldn't reach them in time." His performance was Oscar-worthy, his voice broken with pain and desperate grief. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't felt his hands pushing me toward death just an hour ago, I would have believed completely that he was a devastated son who'd just lost his parents in a tragic accident. "Sir, stay calm." "And Shine," authoritative voice replied, professional and controlled. It must have belonged to the head of the rescue team. "We're going to descend to evaluate the situation. You said you and your wife are injured. Can either of you move?" "I think my leg is broken," Derek replied, his voice trembling convincingly, and Amanda's arm might be fractured. But please, help my parents first. Please, tell me they're okay. The desperation in his voice was so authentic, so convincing. He'd probably been practicing this performance for weeks, had rehearsed every inflection, every emotional beat. Amanda had perfected her role too. Through the sounds of the rescue operation beginning, I heard her sobbing. "It happened so fast," she cried, her voice broken and hysterical. "We were just taking pictures. Everyone was so happy. Then the rock came loose and they fell. We tried to grab them, but we fell too. Oh, God, please tell me they're alive. Please." Every word was a carefully crafted lie, designed to manipulate, to deceive. She would repeat this story to police, to reporters, to anyone who would listen, and her grief would seem completely genuine. The rescuers began their descent, and I could hear their voices getting closer, professional and efficient. They called out coordinates, checked equipment, moved with practiced precision. I could hear the sound of their boots against rock, the clanking of their rescue gear, ropes sliding through carabiners. "We have 4 people at the bottom of the ravine," one rescuer shouted upward to his team once he reached us. 2 appear deceased, 2 injured but conscious, requesting immediate medical evacuation. He approached Thomas first, and I could sense him through my barely open eyes. He was checking for vitals, for signs of life, going through the standard trauma assessment. "This one still has a very faint pulse," he announced, referring to Thomas. "Thready and weak, but present. Possible internal injuries. We need to stabilize him immediately." Then he came to me, and I had to summon every ounce of willpower I possessed to remain perfectly still as his hands checked my neck for a pulse, as his ear came close to my mouth to detect breathing. I made my body completely limp, my breathing so shallow it was almost non-existent, and my eyes staring at nothing with that empty gaze of death. "This one," he paused, checking again, "very weak vital signs, almost imperceptible, severe head trauma visible, critical condition. We need emergency transport for both of them immediately." My heart raced with hope. They thought we were dying but still alive. Perfect. We'd be taken to the hospital where we could reveal the truth safely, away from Derek and Amanda. For the next several minutes, paramedics worked on us with urgent efficiency. I felt them place an oxygen mask over my face, check my wounds with gentle hands, immobilize my injuries, secure me to a rigid backboard, and then a stretcher. The entire time, I had to fight against every instinct screaming at me to open my eyes, to ask for help, to end this terrifying charade. "The male is stable but critical," I heard one paramedic report over the radio to the hospital. "Multiple fractures, possible internal bleeding, head trauma. Female is in very serious condition, possibly more critical. Pulse barely detectable, severe head and spinal injuries visible. Requesting immediate trauma team on standby." Perfect. Our condition sounded severe enough that they'd focus on saving us rather than questioning us, would rush us to surgery before Derek and Amanda could interfere. During the ascent on the stretchers, lifted carefully by the rescue team using a complex pulley system, I could hear Amanda's theatrical sobs floating up from below and Derek's anguished questions. "Are they going to be okay? Please tell me my parents are going to survive this. They're all I have left." The words from a man who'd just murdered his brother and tried to kill his parents were so grotesque, so obscene, that I wanted to scream the truth. But I remained silent, still, trusting the plan. Rescuers offered Derek and Amanda comfort, their voices kind and sympathetic. "You are so brave," someone told Amanda. "Surviving a fall like that and staying conscious, it's remarkable. You'll be okay. We're going to take care of all of you." If only they knew that the real heroes were the ones on stretchers, that the true survivors were playing dead to stay alive. In the medical helicopter as we flew toward the hospital, the noise of the rotors making conversation impossible, I could feel Thomas's presence on the stretcher beside mine. Through slitted eyes, I could see paramedics working on him, checking monitors, adjusting IV lines. From their tense conversations, their worried expressions, I understood his condition was more serious than mine. His injuries were severe, life-threatening. For a terrible moment, I feared he might die before we had the chance to reveal the truth, before justice could be served. "Ma'am," I heard one paramedic say close to my ear, his voice gentle and compassionate. "If you can hear me, hold on. We'll be at Regional Medical Center in just a few minutes. You're going to be okay. Keep fighting." His voice carried genuine concern, real compassion. Such a stark contrast to the fake emotions I'd been hearing from my own family. It made me want to weep, to tell him I was fighting, that I was holding on with everything I had. When we arrived at the hospital, chaos erupted immediately. Controlled medical chaos. Doctors and nurses rushed from every direction, shouting orders I didn't understand. Medical terminology flying fast and urgent. I was taken directly to a trauma bay, where a team began working on my injuries with practiced efficiency, cutting away my clothes, starting additional IV lines, calling for x-rays and CT scans. I had to keep pretending to be unconscious, but I also had to find some way to communicate with someone I could trust, someone who would believe the impossible truth. Time was running out. Derek and Amanda would be brought in soon, would be in the same emergency department, might find a way to get to us. "Dr. Chen?" I heard a nurse say, her voice worried. "Her vital signs are unusual. Her pulse is stronger than we'd expect for someone in her supposed condition. Blood pressure is low, but not as critically low as the field assessment indicated. It's almost like—" She trailed off, but I knew what she was thinking. It was almost like I wasn't as badly injured as I appeared, almost like I was conscious and controlling my responses. My heart skipped a beat. They were discovering my deception. My body was betraying me, showing signs of life I couldn't fully suppress. Dr. Chen murmured, and I could sense him leaning closer, examining me more carefully. "It happens sometimes in cases of extreme trauma and shock. The body has mysterious ways of clinging to life, of marshaling resources. Adrenaline can do remarkable things. Let's continue treatment and monitor her closely. The next few hours will tell us more." I breathed an internal sigh of relief. He'd attributed my stronger vitals to trauma response rather than conscious deception. But I couldn't maintain this act much longer. The medical team was too skilled, too observant. Hours passed in a blur of medical procedures, x-rays, CT scans, ultrasounds. I was moved to different rooms, examined by different specialists, all while maintaining my unconscious act. The pain was immense, made worse by having to stay still, but I endured. Eventually, I was moved to a private room in the ICU, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily. Through my barely open eyelids, I could see it was night now. Darkness outside the window. Thomas was somewhere else in the hospital, hopefully recovering, hopefully still alive. Then I heard footsteps approaching, multiple people entering my room. I recognized the voices immediately. Derek and Amanda, along with a doctor. "We've stabilized them both," the doctor was saying, his voice professionally sympathetic. "Your father has multiple fractures and significant internal injuries, but he's stable for now. Your mother—" He paused. "Her condition is more concerning. The head trauma was severe. The next 24 hours are critical. You should prepare yourselves for any possibility." "Can we see her?" Derek asked, his voice thick with fake emotion. "Just for a moment. We need to say goodbye, just in case." "No, not yet. I wasn't ready. They couldn't be allowed near me before I could reveal the truth." "But," the doctor agreed, because why wouldn't he? These were grieving family members who'd survived the same accident. "Just for a few minutes," he said kindly. "Don't tire her. Even though she's unconscious, sometimes patients can still hear even when they can't respond." If only he knew how right he was. Footsteps approached my bed, Derek limping, Amanda walking carefully, both of them injured but mobile. This was the most dangerous moment yet. I had to convince them I was truly dying, had to make them believe their plan had succeeded. I felt Derek's presence beside my bed, felt his hand touch mine. It took every ounce of willpower not to jerk my hand away, not to scream at him to get away from me. His touch felt like ice, like death itself. "Mom," he whispered, his voice soft and tender, perfectly calibrated for any nurses who might overhear. "If you can hear me, I want you to know that I love you. I'm so sorry this happened. We tried so hard to save you." His words were poisoned honey, lies wrapped in false sentiment. But then he leaned closer to my ear, and his voice dropped to a whisper so quiet only I could hear. "I hope you've learned your lesson, Mom." He breathed, his words sending ice through my veins. "You should never have asked so many questions about our finances. You should have just signed everything over and enjoyed your retirement. Some truths are better left buried, just like Nathan, just like you'll be buried soon." At that moment, I knew our plan had worked. Derek had just confessed, had just connected himself directly to Nathan's murder. And even though Thomas's phone was somewhere with his belongings, there was someone else in the room who'd heard every word. Nurse Elena, the young woman whose name I'd glimpsed on her ID badge earlier, had frozen beside the monitoring machine. Through my peripheral vision, I saw her eyes widen in shock and horror. She'd heard something she shouldn't have heard, something that didn't fit with the story of a tragic accident. And her expression told me she understood the implications perfectly. "What did you just say about Nathan?" Amanda whispered sharply, obviously surprised and alarmed by the mention of the dead brother. Derek tensed, realizing he'd said too much, had let his guard slip in what he thought was a moment of complete safety. "Nothing," he muttered quickly. "I just meant Mom always wondered what really happened that night with Nathan. I guess it doesn't matter anymore since she's dying anyway." But it did matter, and Amanda was smart enough to realize her husband had made a potentially catastrophic mistake. "Derek," she said, in a tense voice loaded with warning, "let's go now. The doctors need space to work." I could feel the tension between them, could sense their mutual understanding that they'd said too much in the wrong place at the wrong time. After they left, probably arguing in harsh whispers in the hallway, Nurse Elena approached my bed slowly. "Ma'am," she whispered so quietly I could barely hear her, her voice shaking slightly, "I know you can hear me. What I just heard isn't normal, isn't right. If you're in danger from those people, if you need help, you need to tell me somehow. Please." Her voice carried such urgency, such genuine concern. Someone else had finally started to suspect, finally seen through the lies. Very slowly, moving just the smallest amount possible, I moved my index finger against the bedsheet. It was the tiniest movement, barely perceptible. But Elena noticed immediately. Her sharp intake of breath told me she'd seen it. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice filled with shock and understanding. "You're awake. You're conscious. You've been pretending." I moved my finger again, twice this time. "Yes, yes." "Listen carefully," she said, leaning even closer, her hand gently touching my arm. "I'm going to pretend I'm checking your monitors and adjusting your IV. If you're in danger from those people who were just here, if they did this to you on purpose, move your finger 3 times. Can you do that?" Without hesitation, without any doubt, I moved my finger 3 distinct times. Elena gasped softly, her hand tightening on my arm. "They did this to you. They pushed you. It wasn't an accident." 3 more movements confirmed it, affirmed the terrible truth. The nurse stepped away from my bed, her mind clearly racing, trying to decide what to do with this impossible information. I could see her struggling, weighing, her medical duties against the enormity of what she'd just discovered. Finally, she approached me again, her decision made. "I'm going to speak with the chief of emergency medicine," she whispered, "and I'm calling the police. But I need you to keep pretending until we can protect you properly. Do you understand? Don't let them know you're conscious. Not yet." I moved my finger once. I understand. The next several minutes were agonizing, each second stretching into eternity. Elena left the room, and I was alone with just the beeping of monitors and my own racing thoughts. What if she didn't believe her own instincts? What if she decided she'd imagined the finger movements? What if Derek and Amanda came back before help arrived? But then I heard footsteps, multiple people approaching. Elena had returned, accompanied by others. I recognized voices. An older man who must have been Dr. Chen, the chief physician she'd mentioned, and surprisingly, two different voices that identified themselves as police officers. "Ma'am," Dr. Chen said in a low, calm voice, "Nurse Rodriguez told me about your situation. If you can hear me, if what she suspects is true, I need you to know that you're safe now. These officers are here to protect you. You can open your eyes. It's okay." A wave of relief so intense washed over me that I nearly broke down sobbing right there. After hours of terror, of maintaining this horrible deception, I could finally stop pretending. I could finally tell the truth. Slowly, very slowly, I opened my eyes. The hospital lights seemed blindingly bright after so long keeping them closed, but I gradually focused on the worried faces surrounding my bed. Elena, with tears in her eyes, Dr. Chen looking grave and concerned, and two police officers with serious expressions. "Thank God," Elena murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "I thought I might be going crazy, might have imagined it." "Ma'am," said one of the police officers, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a nameplate that read, "Detective Martinez. I'm with the county police. We understand you may be in a very dangerous situation. Can you tell us what really happened on that mountain?" My voice came out as a raspy whisper. After hours of silence, my throat dry and painful. My son Derek and his wife, Amanda. "They pushed us. They tried to murder us. They murdered my other son, Nathan, 23 years ago. Thomas. My husband, Thomas, has it all recorded. Everything. On his phone. His phone has everything." The words tumbled out in a rush. Years of secrets and lies finally being exposed to the light. Detective Martinez exchanged a glance with his partner. "Your husband has a recording of what happened today?" "Yes," I whispered, my voice growing stronger with each word, fueled by rage and relief. "Everything. Their confessions, their plan, all of it. Please, you have to get the phone before they realize we're alive, before they destroy the evidence." The detective immediately spoke into his radio, dispatching officers to secure Thomas's belongings and retrieve the phone. Then he turned back to me. "I need you to tell us everything from the beginning. But first, where is your husband now? Is he safe?" "He's somewhere in this hospital," I said, my voice breaking with worry. "He was more badly injured than me. Please, you have to protect him. If Derek and Amanda realize we're alive, if they know we can expose them..." "Officers are being posted outside both your rooms right now," Detective Martinez assured me. "No one will get to either of you. You're both safe. Now, tell us everything." The next few hours became a whirlwind of statements and revelations. I told Detective Martinez everything I knew. Nathan's death 23 years ago, Derek's thefts, the pressure to change our will, the plan to murder us on the mountain, the conversation we'd overheard after the fall. Each detail added another piece to the puzzle, another link in the chain of evidence. But the most important evidence was the recording on Thomas's phone. When they brought it to me, secured in an evidence bag, I saw that the screen was cracked, but the device was still functional. Detective Martinez had a technician extract the audio file immediately. "Your husband was smart," the detective said as they prepared to listen. "He set it to record continuously. If what you're telling us is true, this will be devastating evidence." We listened to the recording together. Thomas's and my voices as we climbed toward the cliff. Derek and Amanda's seemingly innocent comments that took on sinister meaning with context. The moment of the push. Our screams as we fell. And then, most damning of all, Derek and Amanda's conversation after the fall. Their voices came through clearly on the recording. Perfect. It worked exactly as we planned. At least we don't have to pretend we love them anymore. Remember the story we rehearsed. Every word was captured, every confession preserved. "This is extraordinary evidence," Detective Martinez said, his voice filled with satisfaction. "Combined with your testimony and what Nurse Rodriguez overheard, we have a solid case. But there's more we need to investigate. You mentioned your son Derek owed money to dangerous people?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Thomas found evidence that Derek's business is bankrupt and he owes over $120,000 to various creditors, including $75,000 to a loan shark. He needed our inheritance to save his own life." The detective nodded grimly. "That establishes clear motive." "And you said Derek murdered your other son Nathan 23 years ago? Can you tell me about that?" I explained everything Thomas had told me, how he'd witnessed the murder at Miller's quarry, how he'd covered it up to protect Derek, how the guilt had eaten at him for over 2 decades. With each revelation, the detective's expression grew darker. "We'll need to reopen Nathan's case," he said, "with your husband's testimony in the context of what happened. Today, we may be able to bring charges for that murder as well." Hours later, after I'd given my complete statement and been treated for my injuries, broken arm, dislocated shoulder, severe bruising, and a mild concussion, Detective Martinez returned with news. "We've arrested Derek and Amanda Black," he announced. "They were in the waiting room giving interviews to reporters about the tragic accident that killed their beloved parents. They had no idea you and your husband were alive and talking to us. Their reactions when we placed them under arrest were enlightening." "What did they say?" I asked, needing to know. "At first they claimed we were crazy, that you must be confused from your injuries, that this was all a tragic misunderstanding. But when we told them about the recording, everything changed. Derek started yelling that it was impossible, that we were dead, that he'd checked our bodies himself." The detective's expression was grim. "That involuntary confession was captured on our body cameras. Then Amanda tried to blame everything on Derek, said he'd forced her to go along with it, that she'd been afraid of him. And Derek turned on her, screaming that the whole cliff idea had been hers, that she'd planned everything. Within minutes, they were both trying to throw each other under the bus, destroying any chance of a unified defense. A fierce satisfaction filled me. Their alliance, built on greed and murder, had crumbled the instant they faced consequences." "What happens now?" I asked. "They're both being charged with 2 counts of attempted murder for what they did to you and your husband," Detective Martinez explained. "And we're working with the district attorney on charges related to Nathan's death 23 years ago. We're also investigating the financial crimes, theft, fraud, forgery. By the time we're done building the case, they'll both be facing life in prison without possibility of parole." Over the next few days, as I recovered in the hospital, the full scope of Derek and Amanda's crimes came to light. Investigators discovered they'd been planning our murders for at least 6 months since we'd first mentioned updating our will. They'd scouted multiple locations before choosing that specific cliff. They'd researched how to make deaths look accidental. They'd even taken out a large life insurance policy on us without our knowledge, forging our signatures on the applications. The depth of their premeditation was staggering. These weren't crimes of passion or desperate decisions made under pressure. They were calculated, planned murders by people who'd spent months preparing. Thomas recovered slowly, in a room down the hall from mine, his injuries more severe than mine, but not life-threatening. When we were both stable enough, the hospital moved us into the same room so we could be together. The first time I saw him, after everything that had happened, we both broke down crying, holding each other as tightly as our injuries would allow. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry for keeping the secret about Nathan. I'm sorry for putting us in danger. I'm sorry for everything." "We survived," I told him, stroking his face with my uninjured hand. "We survived, and now there will be justice. For us, and finally for Nathan." My brother Marcus arrived from across town the day after the arrests, crying and embracing me carefully, mindful of my injuries. "Margaret," he said over and over, "I always knew there was something wrong with Derek after Nathan died. I told you something was off about him, but I never thought he was capable of this." His words were both comfort and confirmation that my instincts hadn't been completely wrong, that the unease I'd felt had been justified. "What about the children?" I asked, my heart breaking for Emma and Jacob. "What about Derek's kids?" "Social services took custody of them temporarily," Marcus explained. "They're staying with a foster family who specializes in trauma cases. The poor things are confused, asking when their parents are coming home, not understanding why everything has changed." The idea of those innocent children suffering for their parents' crimes broke my heart. "When we're recovered," I said firmly, "Thomas and I are applying for custody. Those kids are innocent. They deserve a chance to grow up knowing what real love is, not the manipulative, toxic version they received from Derek and Amanda." Marcus nodded with understanding. "That's going to be a long, difficult road. Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No," I admitted. "But they're our grandchildren, and they need us. We can't let Derek's evil destroy another generation." The local press picked up the story quickly, and within days it had gone national. "Family pushes parents off cliff in inheritance murder plot," read one headline. "Son murders brother. Tries to kill parents 23 years later," read another. Reporters camped outside the hospital, trying to get interviews, wanting our story. We refused all media requests, needing time to heal physically and emotionally. But the district attorney kept us updated on the legal proceedings as the case built toward trial. "We have overwhelming evidence," he told us during a meeting in my hospital room 3 weeks after the arrests. "The recording alone would be enough to convict them. But combined with your testimony, Nurse Rodriguez's statement, their own confessions during arrest, and all the financial evidence, this case is as solid as they come. They're trying to negotiate lesser charges, but we're not accepting any plea deals. They're going to trial for first-degree murder, attempted in your case, and we're working on charges for Nathan's actual murder." "Can you really charge them for Nathan's death after 23 years?" Thomas asked, his voice heavy with guilt. "It's complicated," the DA admitted. "There's no statute of limitations on murder, but proving it will be challenging. However, your testimony, combined with the context of what they tried to do to you, establishes a clear pattern. Derek confessed to you about Nathan, and he mentioned Nathan in front of Nurse Rodriguez. We're building the case." It took 7 months for the case to go to trial. 7 months of recovery, both physical and emotional. 7 months of therapy to process the trauma. 7 months of working with social services to prepare for custody of Emma and Jacob. 7 months of watching Derek and Amanda's lawyers try every tactic to get the charges reduced or dismissed, all without success. Thomas and I were finally able to go home 4 weeks after the incident, both of us with casts and bandages, but alive and healing. The house felt different now, haunted by memories of lies and betrayal. Every room reminded us of dinners with Derek and Amanda, of their fake smiles and false affection. It took months before the house felt like home again, rather than a crime scene. But slowly, painfully, we rebuilt our lives. We attended trauma therapy together, processing not just the recent attempt on our lives, but also the 23 years of living with Derek's lies. Thomas finally dealt with his guilt over covering up Nathan's murder, and I worked through my anger and sense of betrayal. On the day of the trial, 7 months after that terrible day on the cliff, Thomas and I entered the courthouse together. Derek and Amanda were already there at the defense table, both in jail jumpsuits, looking diminished and defeated. When Derek saw us walk in alive and healthy, his face went white. He'd probably been hoping against hope that we'd die from our injuries, that the case would fall apart without our testimony. The trial lasted 4 weeks. The prosecution presented the recording, which was played in its entirety in the courtroom. Hearing Derek and Amanda's voices discussing our deaths, their casual cruelty, their complete lack of remorse, it was devastating, even though I'd heard it dozens of times before. Several jury members were visibly emotional, one woman crying openly as she listened. Nurse Elena testified about Derek's whispered confession and his reference to Nathan being buried. The financial investigators presented evidence of Derek's debts and the forged documents. Thomas testified about witnessing Nathan's murder 23 years ago, breaking down on the stand as he described watching his oldest son die while his youngest son stood over the body. And I testified about the mounting pressure to change our will, the manipulative behavior, the sense of danger that had grown over months. I described looking into my son's eyes on that cliff and seeing nothing but cold calculation as he pushed us toward death. Derek's lawyers tried to argue that the whole thing had been a tragic accident, that their clients had fallen along with us while trying to help. They claimed the recording had been taken out of context, that our memories were unreliable due to trauma. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too clear. Amanda's lawyers tried a different tactic, claiming she'd been coerced by Derek, that she'd been a victim of his manipulation, but the recording proved otherwise. Her voice was just as enthusiastic, just as cruel. She'd been a full partner in the murder plot, not a reluctant participant. The jury deliberated for 4 days, 4 agonizing days where Thomas and I held our breath, terrified that somehow Derek and Amanda would escape justice. But on the 5th day, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. Derek was found guilty of first-degree attempted murder, 2 counts for Thomas and me, first-degree murder for Nathan's death, fraud, theft, and forgery. Amanda was found guilty of first-degree attempted murder, 2 counts, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud as an accomplice. Both were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served consecutively rather than concurrently. They would die in prison, would never again see daylight as free people. When the judge read the sentence, Amanda collapsed in her chair, sobbing. Derek just stared straight ahead, his face expressionless, shut down. I felt no satisfaction, no joy, only a profound sadness for what our family had become, for the waste of lives and potential. But I also felt something else. Relief. Justice had finally been served, not just for Thomas and me, but for Nathan too. After 23 years, my eldest son's murder had been acknowledged, his killer held accountable. Now, 1 year after that terrible day on the cliff, Thomas and I have formally adopted Emma and Jacob. The process was long and emotionally difficult. The children struggled to understand why they couldn't see their parents, why everything had changed. We've been honest with them in age-appropriate ways, explaining that their mommy and daddy made very bad choices that hurt people, that they're in prison as a consequence. We've also started telling them about their Uncle Nathan, the brother they never knew. Every night before bed, I tell them stories about Nathan's kindness, his sense of humor, his dreams of becoming a lawyer to help people. I show them photos of him at different ages, help them understand that they come from a family with good people in it too, not just the monsters who created them. Emma, who's 8 now, recently told me, "Grandma, I'm glad you and Grandpa didn't die on the mountain. I'm glad we get to live with you." Her simple words brought tears to my eyes, reminded me why we fought so hard to survive. Jacob, who's only 5, still asks sometimes when his mommy and daddy are coming home. Each time breaks my heart a little, but we tell him the truth, that they can't come home because they hurt people, that they're in a place where people go when they break very serious rules. The wound will never fully heal. The betrayal runs too deep, touches too many years. But Thomas and I have each other. We have the truth, and we have a second chance to raise these children the right way, with real love, genuine trust, and absolute honesty. We take them to visit Nathan's grave once a month. They put flowers on their uncle's headstone, and we tell them more stories about him. We're determined that Nathan won't be forgotten, that his life will mean something to this new generation. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up with nightmares of falling off that cliff, of feeling Derek's hands on my back. But then Thomas holds me, reminds me that we survived, that we won, that justice was served. And gradually, night by night, the nightmares are becoming less frequent. The house finally feels like home again. We've redecorated, changed things around, made it feel less haunted by Derek and Amanda's presence. The kitchen table where they sat and plotted our deaths has been replaced. The guest room where they stayed has been converted into a playroom for Emma and Jacob. We're building new memories now, better memories. Last week, Jacob lost his first tooth and was so excited that he could barely sleep. Emma won an award at school for a story she wrote about kindness. These small moments of normal childhood joy help heal the wounds, remind us that life continues, that good can come from even the darkest situations. My brother Marcus visits every Sunday now, bringing his family. The house fills with laughter again, with children playing in the backyard just like it used to when Nathan and Derek were young. But continue our 8:08 p.m. this time. The love is real. This time, there are no secrets, no lies hiding beneath the surface. People often ask me if I can ever forgive Derek for what he did, for killing Nathan, for trying to kill us, for the decades of lies. The truth is, I don't know. Some days I think I've forgiven him, released the anger for my own peace of mind. Other days, the rage returns fresh and raw, and I have to work through it again with my therapist. But what I do know is this: I refuse to let Derek's evil define the rest of my life. I refuse to give him that power. He took 23 years of my life by hiding Nathan's murder. He almost took everything by trying to kill us, but he failed. Thomas and I survived. We exposed the truth, and now we're using the years we have left to do something good, to raise his children to be better people than he ever was. Every night when I tuck Emma and Jacob into bed, when I kiss their foreheads and tell them I love them, I'm fighting back against the darkness Derek brought into our lives. Every moment of genuine love, every act of true kindness is a victory over his legacy of lies and murder. This past week, I returned to work at the library part-time. It felt good to be among books again, to help patrons find stories of hope and redemption, to be part of the community in a normal way. People treat me differently now. They know our story. They've seen the news coverage. Some are sympathetic. Others are curious. A few are uncomfortable. But I'm learning to live with being the woman who survived her son's murder attempt, to carry that identity alongside all my other identities as librarian, wife, mother, grandmother. Thomas has struggled more than I have with reintegration into normal life. His guilt over covering up Nathan's murder, over enabling Derek for 23 years, weighs heavily on him. Some days he can barely get out of bed, the depression overwhelming him. But he's in therapy, taking medication, trying to heal. And slowly, very slowly, he's learning to forgive himself, to accept that he did the best he could with an impossible situation. Last month, on what would have been Nathan's 45th birthday, we held a memorial service for him, a real one, not like the funeral 23 years ago where half the mourners didn't know they were grieving a murder victim. We invited his friends, his former professors, people who'd known and loved him. We told them the truth about how he died, about his bravery in confronting Derek, about his desire to protect us. It was painful, but cathartic, finally being able to publicly honor Nathan's memory with the full truth. Several of his friends shared stories I'd never heard about Nathan's generosity, his plans to start a nonprofit law practice to help people who couldn't afford attorneys, his dream of making a real difference in the world. Hearing these stories reminded me of all that was lost when Derek pushed him off that cliff, all the good Nathan could have done if he'd been allowed to live. Emma asked me recently why her daddy did such bad things. It's a question I've been dreading, one that I'm still not sure how to fully answer. How do you explain evil to a child? How do you help her understand that the man who was her father was also a murderer, without making her feel like she's somehow tainted by his crimes? Sometimes, I told her carefully, people make choices that hurt others because they want something very badly, and they convince themselves that getting what they want is more important than being a good person. Your daddy wanted money more than he wanted to be honest and kind. He made very, very bad choices. And now he has to live with the consequences of those choices for the rest of his life. But I'm not like him, right? She asked, her voice small and scared. I won't grow up to be bad like him. No, sweetheart, I assured her, pulling her close. You are your own person. You get to choose every day what kind of person you want to be. And I see you making good choices, being kind to your brother, helping at school, telling the truth even when it's hard. You're nothing like your father. You're better. These conversations are exhausting, heartbreaking, but necessary. Emma and Jacob deserve honesty, deserve to know their history so they can consciously choose a different path. The legal aftermath continues even a year later. Civil lawsuits, financial recovery efforts, sorting through the mess Derek made of his business and debts. We discovered he'd taken out credit. Cards in our names without permission, had forged our signatures on loan applications, had been systematically stealing from us for far longer than we'd known. Nearly 15 years, starting shortly after he got married. The total amount he stole comes to over $95,000 when you add it all up, money that should have been our retirement, our security, our grandchildren's college funds. We'll never recover most of it. Derek spent it maintaining the illusion of success, buying expensive vehicles and taking lavish vacations, keeping up appearances while drowning in debt. But we're managing. The life insurance policy Derek had secretly taken out on us was voided due to his criminal actions, and that money would have gone to him anyway. Our own savings, what's left of them, will have to be enough. We're living more modestly now, but we're alive to live it all. That's worth more than any amount of money. Sometimes I think about the what-ifs. What if Nathan had never discovered Derek's theft? What if Thomas had gone to the police 23 years ago instead of covering up the murder? What if we'd refused to go on that mountain hike? Would we have been safer, or would Derek have just found another way to kill us? But I try not to dwell on alternate histories. We can't change the past, can only move forward with the present we have. And our present, while built on tragedy and trauma, also contains genuine love, real family, and the possibility of healing. Next month, Emma will turn 9. She's asked for a birthday party with her new friends from school, children who know her as Emma, Thomas, and Margaret's granddaughter, not as the daughter of convicted murderers. We're planning a celebration in our backyard with cake and games and normal childhood joy. It will be the first completely happy family celebration in this house in 24 years, untainted by Derek's presence and lies. I'm learning to trust again, though it's hard. Every new person who comes into our lives, I find myself watching for signs of deception, for hidden motives. My therapist says this hypervigilance is normal after such profound betrayal by someone so close. She says it will ease with time, that I'll learn to distinguish between appropriate caution and paranoid suspicion. Thomas and I have renewed our wedding vows, a small ceremony in our backyard with just Marcus's family and a few close friends. It felt important to mark a new beginning, to acknowledge that we'd survived something together that would have destroyed many marriages. Our love, tested by the worst possible circumstances, proved strong enough to endure. The vows we spoke were different this time, not the optimistic promises of young people who think love conquers all, but the realistic commitments of people who've seen the worst and chosen to keep going anyway. I promise to trust you even when it's hard, I said. I promise to forgive mistakes and share burdens and build something good from these ashes. Looking back now at everything that's happened, I realize that our story isn't really about Derek and Amanda at all. It's about survival, about choosing life over death, about refusing to let evil win. It's about Thomas's split-second decision to grab Derek's wrist even as we were being pushed to our deaths. It's about my choice to move my finger when Nurse Elena whispered that crucial question. It's about two people in their late 50s deciding they still had something to live for, still had love to give. And Derek wanted our money, wanted our deaths, wanted to erase the obstacles standing between him and his escape from consequences. But he failed. He's in prison, we'll die in prison, while Thomas and I are here raising his children to be better than he ever was. That's our victory. That's our justice. I still visit the cliff sometimes, the place where Derek tried to kill us, where we fell 80 feet and somehow survived. I'm not sure why I go there. Maybe to prove to myself that it really happened, that I didn't imagine it all, maybe to remind myself how strong I am, that I survived something that should have killed me. Maybe just to say thank you to whatever power or luck or fate intervened that day to save us. The ravine looks different now in daylight, peaceful almost. Birds sing in the trees, wildflowers bloom in the spring. Nature doesn't care about human evil, just continues its cycles regardless. There's something comforting in that, the reminder that life goes on, that the world is bigger than our tragedies. Thomas came with me last time, both of us standing at the top of the cliff, looking down at where we'd landed. "Do you think Nathan knows?" he asked quietly. "Do you think he knows we finally got justice for him?" "I'd like to think so," I replied, taking his hand. "I'd like to think he can finally rest now, knowing the truth is out, knowing his killer is in prison. We don't know what the future holds. Emma and Jacob will grow up carrying the knowledge of what their biological parents did. That burden will shape them in ways we can't yet predict. But they'll also grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally, that they're safe, that the adults in their lives will protect them no matter what. And that's what I hold on to now. Not the horror of that day on the cliff, not the betrayal and lies that preceded it, but the simple truth that Thomas and I are still here. We survived, we told the truth, justice was served, and now we're using every day we have left to build something good, to show Emma and Jacob what real family looks like. My name is Margaret. I'm 59 years old now, and this is my story. It's a story of betrayal and survival, of evil and justice, of lies and truth. It's not the story I would have chosen to live, but it's mine, and I'm still here to tell it. That has to mean something. That has to be enough.